Thank you. Mr. Wittman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. Secretary Kendall, I want to begin with you. Last year you said, if it doesn't threaten China, why are we doing it? I couldn't agree more. We had that conversation the other day. You also said, in your words, that you're focused on the shortest path possible to a better generation of actual fielded capability. Last year, General Brown, you acknowledged, again, in your words, by saying China continues to move its modernization timelines left at a rate of change that is outpacing the United States. This year's budget submission from the Air Force over the next 5 years retires 646 aircraft and builds 246 aircraft. That's a deficit of 400 aircraft. And I understand NGAD and modernization and all the things that we want our aircraft to do, unmanned platforms, but 400 is one heck of a big vulnerability, capacity, and capability gap that, in light of your words about the things that scare China or the things that we need to move our efforts to the left because we're being outpaced by China, just doesn't seem to add up. Can you give me your perspective on what operational risk you think that we will be facing in the next 5 years as we spin down 646 aircraft and build back 246?
Appreciate the question. There is operational risk, and this is something that when I talk about balancing risk over time, there's a balance between the operational risk we will see today as we make that transition versus the risk we will have in the future if we don't start to modernize. And this is a conversation that I have internally with the Air Force. It's a conversation I have with our combatant commanders and naturally with this committee and others. We do have to make some tough choices. I also look at not just the numbers, but I look at the overall capability and capacity, not just the airplanes, but what goes with the airplanes, as I mentioned earlier, whether it be the weapons, our trained airmen, the support systems that go with. And so it's a complete package. But I agree, there is some risk there. But I'd rather take a little bit of risk now than a lot of risk later in a future conflict.
Gotcha. Let me ask this to both Secretary Kendall and General Brown. What investments do you support that would accelerate these modernization timelines, that would, however you term it, buy back some of that risk or reduce that risk over time?
I was thinking as you spoke earlier, Congressman, about China and their relative performance compared to ours. I've looked at the data on this. Their engineers are not faster than our engineers. Their lead time to field any given capability is comparable to our own. But what they have done that we have not probably done enough of is start a lot of new things and then take them through to fielding. When I look at the scale and the breadth of what they're doing to modernize, they seem to be very open to integrating new technologies and integrating them and using them in creative ways. We've got to be more forthcoming about that sort of thing. So that requires some cultural changes, if you will. Acceptance of uncrewed combat aircraft, for example. We have to actually do what we talk about in programs like JADC2 and ABMS and get to real capability. When I look at what we've done, particularly over the last few years, we've done programs that were designed to go fast, but they weren't necessarily going in the right direction, and they didn't necessarily get to the place you want to get to. It's the hare and the tortoise problem. Going quickly to do a demonstration doesn't get you very far down the road to a real fielded production-ready capability. So I've asked our acquisition people to look at all those programs and make sure they're structured to, and my guidance is to get meaningful military capability, not just one or two or something, but meaningful military capability as quickly as possible. At the end of the day, that's going to be about resources. Production is much more expensive than R&D, and sustainment is comparable to production. So at the end of the day, we're going to need the support of this committee and others to move some of those programs forward and get them into production. We will accept some risk. We can accept quite a bit of risk in early experimental phases where failure is acceptable, and we want to try things. But once we commit to a real product, we want to manage that risk so that we do get the product. And it includes trades-off between requirements sometimes and cost and other things and risk. It requires prudent investment to draw down risk, to drive it down as efficiently and quickly as possible. And General Brown was talking about risk over time. I'm very aware of the increasing threats that we're going to be facing, looking out at what their programs are and what they're going to be fielding. And as much as we might have concerns today, they're going to be much worse in the future if we don't make the right investments.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.